seems to be recording. We'll see if it is or not. My phone here is my little cheat sheet guide. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about using underglazes or on-goes or colored slips. And honestly, an on-go is a colored slip, but it's kind of between a slip and a glaze because it usually has a little bit of silica and a little bit of flux, so it sticks a little more aggressively in firing. I tend to use the term kind of interchangeably, honestly, but I don't really do it. So there's a couple different ways that we can do this. So one of the techniques that is pretty popular is a technique called sgraffito. So this needs to be done on unfired clay. Usually it's going to be when your clay is pretty leather hard. So this is my ocarina. It's pretty ugly right now, but so it actually makes noise. That's cool. So it's kind of fun. Very, very, very hard leather hard right now. So it's like I can knock on it, but I can still carve it, which is what I want to be able to do. I lost my oh, it's under there, isn't it? Yep. Losing track of stuff. And oh, I have it right here. Okay, I know what I'm doing. So for sgraffito, I can use colored slips or I can use underglazes. Some of these are a little more watery, so I'm going to use some of the watery ones too. And depending on how I want those to look, if I want them to be really opaque, then I can use underglazes. So underglazes are literally like colorants in a water base. They can be used under your glaze, so on your clay. It stays the color that it is. I can actually mix them like paint, so I know what it's going to look like. I can paint it on when the pieces will get hard before it's fired, and I can also paint it on to a piece once it's dipped, and it will stick. And typically, I think a lot of people use it when the piece is best, but for the purposes of sgraffito, you would need to use it before the piece is fired. So sgraffito literally means to scratch through something. So this clay is going to fire mostly white. It's a recu clay that I bought for my high school students. So I can paint this on however I want it. So one thing, obviously, I can control the shape that I paint things. So I can paint it how I want it on here. Say I don't want it to be just one solid color and carve through. Maybe I want to do a pattern with my color. I'm going to let that kind of firm up a little bit. And then I can also use a colored slip. So the color in the slip is going to be from a stain, and it's going to intensify when it gets fired. So it's going to look a little bit lighter. I have actually a lot of blue in this. You can see that it is blue, but it's going to be bluer when it fires because there's a decent amount of it in there. I'm going to paint that on.
Now, is that because the water?
It's just not
the chemical nature of it.
It's the chemical nature of it. Yeah, it's like certain percentages will yield you certain color intensities. And that's like if you get mason stains, which are in that, it's actually a brand name of stain that is made for ceramic purposes, and I think also possibly glass purposes, but they can use more colored glasses and tips for that. But basically, it's best to experiment with it to get the colors that you want to get it to. You can also add stains to your clay and have colored clay. And there's a whole other thing that I'm probably going to show you guys later about like using colored clays together and layering those and then creating something out of that. Yeah, exactly. So let's set them up. So this is firm enough that this has started to dry to the touch on the outside. And I can now carve through this. And I can use just a pencil. I could use an X-Acto knife, which I haven't put my blade around yet, from its travel position. And it doesn't need to be a good X-Acto knife because we're carving into clay. So it just needs to be able to scratch it. And then I have my little carving tool. Do that for watching. It's just a little tiny wire loop tool. And then I'm going to carve through my layer of that, and for you guys, my layer of underglaze. And wherever I carve through, it's going to be the color of the clay underneath. So if I covered this whole thing, it would be like red and white. I can do this with a pencil too. I can draw with my pencil and create whatever lines I want to. And just doodle at this point because I'm in the house. So whatever I want on there. And then obviously when it dries a little more, I can brush that away. I can layer these and color over them even more. I'm trying to think if I want to do this yet. Let me do. And then I can.
They combine the colors.
So they'll tend to layer on top of each other if I let them dry in between. And then if I use, especially if I use color slips and I make them kind of thick, I'll be able to see those layers of color as I carve through it. And I can use more and less pressure to expose more and less of the colorant underneath. There's one of the pottery throwdown videos. They use layers of color slips to create this, and then carve through them in different,
like seeing different colors.
so you can see the layers, or they stop at a point where you can see certain colors instead of all the way down to the clay. I should say the clay, the original clay body. So, and then I can, so let's say I did this red area, and instead of wanting to the white of the clay underneath, let me do another color too, just for shit. I can find one of my brushes. I don't care which one. Come back to this later. Well, let's say I didn't want my line to be the white of the clay body. I wanted it to be a different color. So what I can do is I can take a liquid wax. And this is the kind of thing that they will not ship right now because when it freezes, it stops working. So it's just a water-based wax. You probably, I brought some glue to try it and see how it works. I'm not doing it right now because I don't want to test it while demo, but we'll see how it works. You can use shellac as a resist because it's alcohol based and it'll dry fairly quickly. I'm going to let that dry to the touch. Brush in the water before it dries. So what I can do is I'll let that dry and then I can carve through it. And then I can paint my underglaze into those cracks. I'm going to do it, but I need it to dry first. And then because there's a resist over the red color, my underglaze that I paint on it is only going to go into the areas that I've incised.
And will that resistance burn off?
Yeah, the resist will burn off. So I don't need to worry about it. And it's getting there, it's getting dry. But so while that's drying, this is still a little wet to the touch, but I think it's enough that we can kind of carve through it. So again, this clay's still really soft. So that's a colored slip. Same idea. This slab is still a lot softer than I was hoping it would be at this point. Terrible, but not great. All right. So while I'm thinking about this, while this is still drying and it's almost there because my ocarina is ridiculously hot right now, I'm going to carve through another area here without the slip on. So there's also a technique that's called mishima. And mishima is kind of like the opposite of sgraffito. So it's sort of like the intaglio version versus the relief version on clay. So if you think about relief printing, where most of your area is the color, and then the areas that you had incised on your block do not print. And then there's the intaglio version. So that's sort of your sgraffito. The intaglio version is where you're going to have color in the lines, but you're not going to have color on the outside. And we're going to do that very simply. Let's try to use my colored slip for my water. I'm going to use black so it's easy to see. I'm going to paint this in here, in the lines. And I can just paint over the whole thing. I can also be more delicate with my lines. I'm not very delicate today. This clay is actually very sandy. So it's a little hard to be completely delicate. And then when that dries a little more, I'm going to scrape away the top part, or I can actually sponge it away. One thing I read is that you need to have a natural sponge in order to do this. If you try to use one of the manufactured sponges, it tends to smear instead of wiping away. Let's try it and see, because I haven't done it this way before. I can just wipe. And then I have my color in my lines, but not elsewhere. And that works pretty nicely. So one of the artists that I've seen, Kevin Snipes, he uses both of these techniques quite a bit. And he likes to let some of the messiness show. And so he scrapes away with an X-Acto knife and then leaves some of the noise from the other material where he wants it. And gets that to look the way that he wants it to. All right, so this is dry enough, I believe. Typically, they say you want to wait about 2 hours before you try to add other things on top of it. We're going to push that right now because I didn't think about waxing something beforehand. So I'm going to do a triangle again because I'm in a triangle mood. So when I carve this away,
Are you going to the clay now? Or
I'm going to the clay. I'm carving through the red to the clay, through the wax and the red. And then now, because my piece is waxed in that area, when I brush it in there, it's going to go into the grooves. It's not really going to stick to the waxy area. So now I can wipe that away. And I'm going to have red with the black lines in there. So I can really build up layers of color a lot by playing with using resist and doing. You just have to kind of plan a little bit. Once you put the wax on there, you're not going to be able to add anything over the whole surface, but you can put things back to it. So that's a really fun way to do that. No, that's my notes.
And you always want it to be like leather hard.
Leather hard makes your basically your carved lines be crisper. So it's a lot easier, and your stuff is going to dry quickly enough for you to actually be able to do something. If it's like this, you can see that my slip is still shiny. You guys see that the slip is still shiny on there. So really, that's kind of hard for me not to smear it. All right. So the other thing I can do is I can use stencils. So I can create a stencil, or I can go to Dollar Tree and buy a stencil. And again, if I'm working on my unfired clay, then I can use either slips or underglaze. I'm going to press this down a little bit to make it stick a little bit. And I can just paint over it with my slip, or I'm going to use the underglaze because it's going to be more dramatic and you're going to be able to see it a little bit easier. Ooh, yeah. Nope. Don't play in there. Let me do this. So I can either have something that's cut away like this from using that pattern. Just brushing over my stencil the same way I would on any other stencil. And then when I pull my stencil off, I'm going to be left with what is not there. So I could actually make my own cutout from paper and create my own stencils. I can, yeah, it's kind of like it's supposed to be like leaves, but yeah, it does kind of look like a fire truck, and it's pretty awesome. Or I can, and I'm not sure, this is where I'm not sure if this is going to work on my unfired clay as well. I can use stickers. Sparkly holiday ones. Oh, hey, that works. Probably gonna stick a little better to like a fired body because the adhesive is gonna stick better to a drier material. But we're gonna do a reindeer here. And then you can just do polka dots, or these are just, I could take these and cut them, or just use them like they are to create a pattern from my label, whatever, basically, whatever sticker pattern you see, you can use and do Rudolph here. I don't know if the camera's catching Rudolph, so there we go. So I stuck Rudolph down on there, painting around Rudolph. It's always Rudolph. It's never anybody else. None of those other reindeers really count. I had a narrated Rudolph record that I know by heart still. The story of Rudolph in rhyme. Narrated by Paul Wing. I don't even know who he is, but I know he narrated that record. So I did touch that spot when I was lifting that up. I hit the arm, so I got my little reindeer, which apparently the underlays went under his one antler, so that didn't work as well as I wanted it to, but it's the idea of it. Probably should have stuck it down a little better before I did it. Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, and I can use tape. So I have these little Dollar Tree. Dollar Tree has washi tape right now. I don't know how good it is, but
washi tape. It's what I use to put the black lines on my sculpture, the wood sculpture.
you can also use auto part store style pins that you could use as well. Or you could cut masking tape to be the thickness that you wanted it to be. So yeah, so I could do a whole pattern with this rather than just one line. You know, I could do almost a tartan plaid if I wanted to be crazy with it. I could do a layer in one color and then tape down again after it's firmed up and do a layer in another color. I don't know how well the tape will stick to the underglaze, but I think it's worth an experiment if anybody really wants to do imagery on their pieces. And then of course I can paint directly on my piece. I can also, and this is something we're going to talk about with the silk screen next week, I can also paint on such a I'm ready for big guy yet. But I could paint my underglaze on newsprint, let it dry, and then mist my piece and press it onto the newsprint. What I need to do though is I need to think about that I'm painting things on in reverse order. So like if I were doing a flower, I'd have to paint the center of the flower first, and then like a middle section, and then the outer section, so that when it gets pressed on, so I'm only going to see the background of it when I finish it. For me to do it,
It's like you're painting on glass, so to speak.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You know what
Do
I
you
mean?
get it?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I'll probably I'll do some later, and that way you guys can see what that is. So, and then we talked about molds, and I wanted to make sure I brought in this one mold that I have, because I think Brandy's planning on using molds or creating molds. So we'll go over mold making a little more, but right now I just want to talk about using this surface. So this was just made by creating a big mound of clay and shaping it until I got it right, and it was on a nice smooth board when I did it. And I literally covered the board with the plaster. I did it kind of like when most of you haven't done the clay heads, so I did a splash coat first when the plaster was really thin. So when I first mixed it, I basically flicked plaster at it to get all of the detail on that, to get it as close as possible, and then let the rest of the plaster thicken up, and then put that on the piece that was thicker. And I tried to smooth it out as much as possible in this, and then I went back and I sanded and shaped the underside of this. They're not quite, just a little moldy, but that way I have a mold that I can use the inside of it, but I can also drape things over the outside if I want to. I can use a mold 3 ways. I think about it. This is one of the things where I should have written it down. So I can slip cast, where I pour my slip in. And when I slip cast, I usually add a deflocculant to my slip. And that's a really big word, I know, and we can talk about that if people want to do that. And basically, it makes the clay act thinner, so I can have more clay in my slip and still have it be pourable. So it makes the particles slide off of one another. So you add it to like slip and it makes it more liquidy, but you're not adding more water.
Okay.
And you're barely adding any of the deflocculant. So that way I have less shrinkage and I have more clay. Just throwing that out there. So if I'm slip casting, I'm usually, so the other thing I can do is I can buy a slip that's for slip casting and I can go that way. And we'll talk about deflocculants and that kind of thing later. I don't want to overwhelm you, but
Does it change the color and everything?
no, it doesn't change anything. It just changes the characteristics of the clay. So I have some slips that I use for joining, but sometimes I'll add a little bit of sodium silicate or garbage into it. And that way I can get a little more clay in my slip and it'll still be the watery consistency that I like it to be. I can also do what's called like a hook mold, where I take a slab and I just drape it into my piece and press it in where I want it to be. But I can also just press things into this. So I could press a number of pieces into this and then join it. And then I get a funky texture, maybe from doing that, and pop it out eventually.
Do you like one piece and press it in, or would you try and split the pieces in, like match each?
Well, I think that's kind of up to each individual person, how they want to do that, yeah. So if I want to show the wrinkles in it, then I can just let it fold over itself. I can also probably smooth those away after I pop it out. So, but if I'm using underglaze would probably work for this, but I think this is where colored slip might work better. I'm just gonna dip my black in my, so I could paint my design inside here, inside my mold. I'm gonna do it on the other side too. It's gonna be polka dots. Sort of polka dots. Same idea. I would have to like paint them kind of reverse. So if I was doing something, I'll use a target as an example. So I could paint the individual rings, or I could paint the center first, and then the outer ring over the whole thing, and then a larger ring over the whole thing. And then because when I pop it out, that's going to be on the outside. So, and then I can press my clay into this or pour it in or whatever. And because this is a slip-based colorant, it's going to stick to my clay and it's going to come out on the surface of my clay when I pop it out. So, is that, let me see if I can do it.
Like a transfer.
Yeah. I want to try a little bit of underglaze too and see if I can get it to. So I'm going to do a dot of the underglaze on the inside.
The mold. I just don't know about how they would use each other.
So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to do, let that dry just a little bit. So I'm rushing this a bit. I should do like that. I'm going to do it on the other side for the camera.
This is like oil and water.
Plaster is really porous, and so it releases the clay. Because basically what it does is it pulls the water out of the clay and makes it so, like if you slip cast, you basically pour your clay in, and you have to usually keep putting a little more in because it's going to suck the water out and it's going to shrink back down. And then once you get it to where it's filled and it stays filled, you're going to leave it in there for anywhere from like 15 minutes to half an hour. And it's going to suck the moisture away from the clay that's next to the surface. And then I actually pour the remainder of the slip out. And I'm going to have clay that sticks just to the surface of the plaster. And then I let that set up a little bit longer, and then I can pop that whole thing out.
And how thin will that be?
That depends on how long you leave it in there.
Okay.
So I can leave it in, if I want it thicker, I can leave it in for longer. If I want it thinner, I can leave it in for less.
Now, the what will happen to that mold? Will those underglazes come completely off in the clay? Or does that not matter?
I might need to scrub it a little bit if I'm not doing the same thing again. So, yeah, I think it'll stain it a little bit,
That's what I
but if I rub it down with like a sponge and it's not coming off in the sponge, then it shouldn't come off on my next piece. So for this purpose, we're gonna do a little bit longer.
Yeah,
Oh,
like patties at a time, maybe it was, composite.
yeah, I mean, the advantage of doing it in a mold is that I could decorate the whole outside of my piece before I put it in there and I can pop it all out. It's already got those things on there. And it's just kind of a fun process. I don't know that it's really any faster, but it is really but it's part of the surface then. So if you're somebody that doesn't like brush strokes, it's gonna be the same even surface as the rest of your piece. If you don't mind it being built up a little bit, then you just paint it on your piece afterwards. Because obviously the other option is to paint directly on whatever you're doing with these things to get the colors or patterns that you
So
want.
this book has, there's a potter, Bill Campbell, are you familiar with him at all?
That name's familiar.
He's Pennsylvania, but he pours all of his.
Yeah.
So so he slip casts.
Yeah,
in
you
that,
slip past it.
and that's how he's able to produce some.
And there was a period in time where people referred to painting things that were already slip cast as ceramics.
Yeah.
So every once in a while, when you use the term ceramics, people think you're talking about painting already bisque pieces. I'm like, no, that's not the right term for that.
No, that's what they called it when
I know.
was a kid.
Yeah, and it's because they were ceramic shops. Like, that's great. But ceramics really means anything with clay that's hard. It doesn't mean any one process. So I had somebody that made that mistake recently. They called me up to see what I did, and I described what I did. And I'm like, oh, pottery. I'm like, no, not pottery. It's not pot. Ceramic. Like, get your terms straight.
But then when they're
Yeah, but that's okay, because ceramics just means
Ceramics is
any
the blanketing.
anything that's clay that's fired just doesn't want to let go. Oh, it's kind of coming off. I need
Like
to,
my
I need to let it,
mother-
I
call her
needed to let it
pottery
set longer, but
Oh, okay.
That's crazy.
yeah. So it's tearing away because it still needed to harden a little bit. So I did it with like I had this just cheesy mug mold that was a purchased mold. It's a nice opportunity at the high school level to show the kids what this stuff is. And we can the inside before we told it and one kid just like, that is awesome. Somebody's texting me. All right, I do want to glance at this and make sure I haven't missed anything. Transfer. Okay, so I'm gonna do more. I think when I do this the screen printing stuff next week, provided again that it happens next week, I'll do more with the painting on the newsprint transfer too. But just realize there's a whole array of ways to get images or pattern in color on pieces that's at your disposal. We do not have the wax here. This is my wax, and it's kind of pricey, but I'll see if I can get some, or I'm gonna test with the glue and see if the glue will work.
Just Elmer's.
Elmer's watered down and see how quickly it dries, because it'll just be kind of a matter of whether it dries or not. If it's sitting on a paper strip, it'll burn away. Yeah.
Okay. So some of the, I mean, it's not 100% being processed by what we're making.